The world really is quite depressing at the moment. I don't know what to start complaining about first. There's this, I've got a laundry list of things actually to go through. I think I know why the quality of YouTube is going down tremendously in terms of how they, I think, have maimed their own algorithm for search as well and for recommendations. They've made people less particularized and specialized in their content consumption. The algorithm is no longer searching out things that will actually interest you. It's searching out things that are more mediocre because YouTube has merged with mainstream media to a large degree. They're basically importing television onto YouTube. And the only way to make that mainstream content a seemingly more attractive to the viewer or the audience is to dull down the quality of content that YouTubers or people that are the audience of YouTube um, are used to being treated. So yeah, I think YouTube is actively degrading its own service to lower the appetite of the audience to accept mainstream programming and mainstream media, because the quality of mainstream media as well is terrible. I mean, it's not just in journalism, but the artistic quality, the soap operas and the series and the movies have all become vessels for a feminist ideology, identity politics. I mean, I see feminist ideology is synonymous with identity politics because that's where it comes from. It was all an outgrowth from feminism. Yeah, so what else can be said? Now I'm going to talk about concerns that aren't really universally cultural, but just pertain to where I live, which is in South Africa. I see this is almost like a theological framing of the issue that I'm about to put forward, but it's very esoteric. So I don't mean this is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek criticism of the opposition that I support and that I even vote for. Uh, the Democratic Alliance. So the DA, the only problem that the DA has in my book is that it's trying to attract voters on the basis that it's going to deliver what the Constitution already says that government is tasked with delivering. In terms of its grand policy uh, objectives are basically to the T what is asked of in the Constitution. And the constitution and they also will do it in such a way that is constitutionally valid. They'll stick to the value and principles of non-racialism. So they can have a clean meritocracy. And they can have affirmative action measures, but they have to actually be ameliorative care that is given, treatment that is doled out to some project of transformation that is seeking to empower a group of people, not by skewing the market, but by actually intervening and filling in something that's lacking, so giving people a skill that they didn't have before, or education or something. Or, filling in like putting in a subsidized or free version of transport that links the market, that helps bridge the people who have been historically disadvantaged and that are historically, and as a result are disadvantaged. The disadvantaged part of that must be contemporaneous to this day. So you're targeting a group of disadvantaged people with some kind of solution to one of their problems or things that are stopping development, and just forcing people to hire them based on skin complexion, is something that is obviously going to distort the upper end of the economy, which is also the financial end of the economy. And if you don't make prudent financial, let's say, appropriations, or when things are being planned out, you're going to have a dysfunction in your economy. You can't have, let's say, the brain of an organism, needs to be one of the more protected organs from toxins that might enter the bloodstream, but there's a blood-brain barrier. That's an obscure analogy, but anyway. My point is that I haven't even gotten to the point of contention. My problem with the DA, therefore, is that they would rather deliver to the people of the country by being voted for, rather than trying to resolve these problems of constitutional dysfunction through the courts. Because if they could actually fix the problem through the courts, they would obviate the need for people to vote for them. And I'm afraid that a lot of what the DA tries to do and tries to deliver to people should already be the default, should already be the basic operating premise of how government is run. Now, this might seem like a completely academic issue. It actually isn't. It runs deeper than that, because let's just say that the DA get in some kind of get into power through coalition. Are we going to get the judges that betrayed the non-racialism of our Constitution? Are we going to get those judges impeached? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, we know cadre deployment has touched every institution in the state, including the judiciary. I guess you could create a cadre deployment truth commission and make a truth charter about the deviations in government policy and current government modus operandi and the law itself, the condition of the law. All of this needs to be audited against the value of non-racialism, so we can actually see that the judgments that came out of our judiciary were perverted by cadre deployment, or if they weren't, they were perverted by some kind of ideological racialism which is alien to our country, so that we can excise the bad law. But you see, the judiciary has to be cognizant of this, because otherwise it's going to continue to pollute the law. if the law does not reflect that we actually did deviate from the Constitution, which is not supposed to be possible. I mean, let me just explain how the Constitutional Court has obviously betrayed the Constitution. It says that issues of redress and issues of affirmative action, if we read the limitations clause in the Constitution, can be democratically justified. Now, it does this without actually judging whether that legislation, that racialist policy, it doesn't go through the lettered subsections of the limitations clause. The limitations clause is got Section 36 of the Bill of Rights. It's got A, B, C, D, and E. Now, the A, B, C, D, and E are the actual things that you would actually, the things that you should, those things are sufficient to run through the limitations clause, is to go through A, B, D, C, and E, the different grounds to which things have to be judged. If you don't do an A, B, C, D, E, F, or E, assessment, then you haven't done an assessment according to Section 36. But they just say because we live in a, they've even destroyed the words themselves. They read democracy, but it doesn't even say democracy. It says liberal democracy. A liberal democracy doesn't mean 50% plus one vote gets to decide the fate of things. No, we have a supreme constitution, and if you want to limit a right in the Bill of Rights, that limitation must be according to Section 36. You can't say, well, we're not going to judge how severe a limitation is this. We're going to say that democracy is just allowed to do it. I mean, it's utterly crazy. I mean, what happens if what you were looking at included genocide? What happens if there was something radically illegal about it? You have to do an assessment of if this is a trivial enough thing that you can just let the democracy do whatever it wants. Because as Section 36 says, a right in the Bill of Rights can only be limited according to the limitations clause with its A, B, C, D, and E. The lettered subclauses in the limitations clause are sufficient. There are sufficient conditions for doing a Section 36 assessment. How can they say that a liberal democracy with the Supreme Constitution has been followed when they are willing to trust the democracy with their eyes closed? The limitation of a right in the Bill of Rights. How can the courts do that? That is an overt betrayal of constitutional supremacy. It is highly invalid. It is totally invalid. It's just nonsensical. Trusting Parliament is disgusting. Trusting Parliament with balancing rights in the Bill of Rights with your eyes closed. That's the function of the judiciary in South Africa. Any judge who went along with that judgment, and by the way, this follows the status quo that they have in America. This is what America does with its legal system. It plays these games, these political games. We shouldn't be playing political games like that. The judiciary is stronger. The judiciary in South Africa is the strongest institution, and obviously it had to be corrupted for the state to get into the corrupt state that it's in, which is such a corrupt state that it's tremendous. Okay, so my fear is that people will I mean, this is even to assume that the country is going to be saved and that it's not going to completely implode, depending on the election results over the next 5 years. Implode violently and radically, with the fascists, the EFF pushing for things. Making civil society the last line of defense of the remnant of the Constitution. But anyway, the remnant of the spirit of the Constitution, if I can put it like that. But yeah, so if people, let's say the DA succeeds and they cobble together a coalition that holds government, that wins government, we're not going to have a strong enough legal jurisprudence restarting. We're not going to have a redeemed legal jurisprudence, is what I'm trying to say, because it'll be papered over. It can potentially be papered over politically, where, so what we really need to do is we need to have a truth charter about what the government is doing, which is unlawful and unconstitutional and invalid. We need to have a truth charter like that, which is basically an indictment against the ANC. But broader than that, an indictment against how it's ruled, how it's governed. We can't give Thabo Mbeki a clean slate, because in 2008, it was him who introduced the first black economic empowerment, form of race quotas and things like that. So we've had 3 presidents of racialism. We've had Thabo Mbeki, Zuma, and Ramaphosa have all imposed racialist legislation against South Africa that needs to go, with dates and complaints into a truth charter, I would say. We had a freedom charter a long time ago. I would say there's a lot of pie in the sky, nonsensical ideas in a freedom charter, because it's just like a wish list, and you don't even have a system that has any kind of internal consistency that actually sources where these things are meant to come from. Everything just comes from the ether somehow. It really is based on a kind of Marxist ethic that you deserve to take whatever you want from your society. The assumption is that society must be capable of producing it. But that doesn't just happen by itself. Without freedom of contract and people honoring their contract, you have no honor. And if you try to design a system which is honorless, or that is completely empty of integrity, you're going to end up creating people who just chime and echo heartless slogans and mindless agreements, which are all metaphors and simulacra of human investment. So you end up hollowing out language. I've often wondered if there isn't something rotten in Russian culture that they inherited from the USSR propaganda, if they didn't go through a kind of cultural lobotomy. And that's a very harsh, maybe I'm generalizing too much about Russians, But I wonder if they haven't undergone the process of what I have just outlined. The other thing that I should say about Russians, I think, is that Russia was very obviously at the height of cultural development in their aristocracy, which basically was the engine of the Western civilization in terms of its intellectualism, in terms of its self concordance and self consistency. The Romance culture came out of the aristocracy of Russia as it only could have, because Russia was big enough to have such a large aristocracy that was bigger than the rest of Western Europe combined. And as they lived out this beautiful Romance ethic, there was something important that I wanted to say about Romance culture. Something about individualism. I made a note of it somewhere. Oh yes, that. Yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm just going to. This might only be of interest to so few people in the world, but to people who are interested in the theory of literature, um, I think what romance actually does on a psychosocial level is that it imposes a form of cultural hygiene because it disassociates, it does atomize the self. I think romance gave birth to what we call modernity. And what proceeds from modernity is what is everything there is to be inherited from romance. But that's my teleological hope. So already I'm a partisan for romance. But anyway, what romance does is that it dissociates the individual from their cultural belonging and membership, and it somewhat it forces the mind to atomize the individual and to take responsibility for the individual. So you can see how this mirrors to Christianity, which was one of the core tenets of Romance culture. So yeah, I think that when we look at modernity, what we're looking at is just almost Christianity via romance. Anyway, uh, what this Western bubble does, or this Western way of being, what it means to be Western, what I'm claiming, is that there is a form of self-forgetting as a group entity, that you forget yourself as a group entity, and you distance yourself from membership and belonging, and you have to ground yourself as an individual. Now, what else does this sound like? British political liberalism. So here we have liberalism. And I think that again, it's the same root of Christianity, romance, modernity, liberalism. Liberalism is the proper optimistic outlooker within the modernity scope, anyway. And what this forgetting does, by the way, as well, is that it grounds you in a free human nature, the human nature of freedom, and freedom of the spirit to be curious and to explore. And this can get a bit dirty, but this allows for, let's say, a space of flux to serve itself as a pool of cultural washing off or cultural hygiene, because you can distance yourself from group belonging. Nothing that tattoos the individual from the group is permitted, because then you wouldn't be able to forget the group entity. So the potential forgetting of the group entity is enough already to ward off claims of dominion, of something possessing your soul. And obviously what comes in to take that place is the spirit of freedom, the spirit of truth. So there, anyway, I've said enough about this, I guess. Okay, so yeah, it's just sad that I live in a time when South Africa's national government is constitutionally delinquent, and so too is the judiciary. And what you do about the one is you do have a vote and you vote in new people, but what you do about the other one, it's quite sad that essentially this should have already been dealt with. And hopefully, historically, it will still be resolved. But it needs to be resolved in such a cataclysmic way that it can't happen again, essentially. That we'll have strong enough legal jurisprudence from what, in some sense, the judiciary has to fix itself to some degree, or maybe with some help of impeachments. But how you rewrite the jurisprudence, I don't know how you're going to cancel. You're going to have to go through and find each judgment that was written with a kind of racialist edge to it and mark it out as being an exemplar of what is, this is Nazi. This is Nazi morality. These racialists, how they have infected our institutions with their parasitic, dumbed down version of humanity. How can you read a non-racialist constitution and which is the first duty of each judicial officer is to uphold the Constitution? I guess the last thing that I'll mention, which is, I don't know how to make this a bigger topic, but this really does need to be a topic that some people should explore. It's actually gone unexplored for too long. But essentially that black pride is exactly what is wrong with politics. At least that's how I quantify it in South Africa. The reason why people don't change their vote from the ANC to something else is a kind of fragile ego. It has something to do with not admitting that you're wrong or something like that. Or just not caring. I don't know what's worse, or caring more about the appearances of things. So, scapegoating becomes a necessity. When things are so corrupt and so bad, you either just don't care about corruption, because as long as it's being scapegoated against people that you hate, then it obviously doesn't matter to you. So I guess maybe it's a combination of black pride and a kind of revenge motive, a kind of racialism and a racialist revenge program or plan. But supposedly, the reason to take racialist revenge is to restore pride in your group, or at least to enhance or to make the appearance of its pride more excellently. But yeah, people need to start calling out black pride, I think, as the I think we should ridicule people who try to have racialist pride. It's really that simple. And the idea that black people should get a free pass at this is it's destructive. It's clearly destructive. So yeah, people will seemingly choose pride over having a civilization. I mean, there needs to be some kind of understanding about the distinction between dignity and pride, and also the morality of the Constitution is really the dignity of the individual, not the individual as a racial component of a racial group. That is certainly unconstitutional to a non-racialist constitution. And it seems that people have forgotten that about the Constitution, and it's not taught to our young anymore. And so obviously this is one of the major things that a truth charter would have emblazoned on it right at the top, is this betrayal of non-racialism and its impact on the youth and on morality and on the state and understanding of racialism. In fact, that's what the IRR should do. The IRR should make a non-racialist questionnaire and try and measure the ideological buy-in in the size of the population to notions like black pride and other racialist filth. That might actually be an interesting idea. Anyway. But yeah, sadly, it's just things to be worried about and sad about.